All right, good afternoon. This is Jennifer Wilkinson, and I am so excited to have you guys joining us and super excited about the topic. We are going to be talking about restorative justice approaches today, and we have two fantastic speakers here for you, one on the philosophy and one on the basic practitioner experience. And so I'm going to go ahead, and Dr. Stan Bassler is here, and he's going to give you the history and the big breakdown.
Good afternoon. My name is Stan Bassler, and my title is Professor in Residence, Restorative Justice and Prison Ministry at St. Paul School of Theology, United Methodist Seminary. I've been an advocate for restorative justice since approximately about 1994, and for a lot of people that term doesn't have a precise meaning. So let me spend a few minutes talking about that. Generally speaking, restorative justice is seen in contrast with retributive justice. The three questions asked in retributive justice are what rule was broken, who did it, and what do they deserve. It is mostly reactionary. It looks backwards at what has already happened. The three questions asked in restorative justice are what harm was done, or who was harmed, who should be held accountable, and how do we make it right? Now, I stress that last sentence because the retributive system has a tendency to find one person guilty and to put all of the blame or responsibility on that one person. Restorative justice recognizes that life is more complicated than that we live in systems, and a rule violator is part of an overall situation involving needs and obligations, and might not be the only person with an obligation in that process. For example, if you're dealing with a child who's basically damaged goods anyway, has no support at home, lives in a place of brokenness, then the choice that child makes is not uncomplicated. Free will is impaired to some degree with that kind of life. The outcomes as to justice take different forms. Basically, in a retributive system, the outcome is punishment. In a restorative system, the outcome is accountability, restitution, and compensation. In other words, the focus is on making things as right as we can make them in view of what's happened here. One of the obstacles that we have in our culture, I think, is that we may not like to admit it, we are a people who see the world through a retributive lens, that we are a punitive kind of people. I read a law review article one time where the author asked the question, do we live in a culture where vindictiveness is a virtue? And I think it's simply a question we have to ask ourselves. Are we married to that approach? Howard Zehr, a Mennonite professor, in his seminal work on restorative justice, entitles it Changing Lenses. And he says, we see the world through a lens of retribution. This requires a paradigm shift of learning to see the world through a lens of restoration. Different goals. And of course, what do lenses do? They magnify and they focus. So part of the questions we're asked as educators and administrators, what do we want to magnify? What do we want to focus on? Is it just a matter of a punitive sanction, or is it a calculated effort to create a whole person as well as a academically educated person? Now, there are some realities that I think we should consider when we talk about justice. One of them is, probably all of you who are part of this realize that the scientific evidence is that brain development is not complete till age 25. So we know up front we're dealing with people who are not finished products cognitively. They're more prone to impulsive behavior. And so one of the questions becomes what's fair in adapting to that reality. Another situation I think we need to take account of. I'm not sure how often we think about this when we're dealing with juveniles, which of course includes school children. As a matter of law, we accept the fact that these people are not equipped to take responsibility for their lives in very important ways. You cannot enter a legal binding contract until you reach a certain age because you're apt to be taken advantage of and exercise bad judgment. You cannot vote or run for office or join the military until you reach a certain age because we believe you're incapable of making a good informed decision about those important things. Drinking age, driver's license, other examples where we acknowledge some incompleteness, so to speak, in youth. So I think one of the questions is, what makes most practical sense in the way of dealing with conflicts and infractions in school when we realize these disabilities exist? And to what extent do our practices mirror those that we use for adults? And if so, is that appropriate? Those are simply philosophical questions. I think also the overuse of suspensions is an issue. Certainly, it interrupts academic development. One of the writers I read said, you know, it creates a certain sense of alienation. You're not only out for a while, you come back disadvantaged trying to catch up in school. You've lost class time. You've lost social time. There's a sense in which alienation will follow. And creating good citizens or pro-social people is always more difficult if alienation has set in. Yes, there are disadvantages to restorative justice. And the first one is it's labor intensive. It takes work. And again, I understand today we're talking about an alternative school population primarily. So we're dealing with a population that we know already in a traditional setting has had either academic, behavioral issues, or both, which says to us they probably need additional attention if they're going to be successful. My wife is a public school teacher in a troubled school, and she and some of her colleagues simply had to make a decision that if, in fact, academic process was going to take place, they had to invest time and effort, dialogue, and all of that with some of these students to help them achieve understandings of pro-social conduct before they could expect success in the classroom. Restorative justice is aimed more that way, but truly, it is more labor intensive, and I think we simply need to own that. I think there are cultural and racial issues, sociological issues that play in. There are certain behaviors that are more acceptable in some people's cultural setting that are going to be in a school setting. And if we try to treat everybody the same way without acknowledging those things, we're probably going to have some difficulty. And it could be even restorative justice. We're talking about some students for whom that is so much out of their element that it might not be as easy as we'd like for it to be to create the desired outcome. A little bit of literature I'm going to throw out, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is nothing scientific. I just Googled restorative justice in schools. And going down a few of those things, here's some of the things I discovered. Edutopia says that Prison Fellowship has a 4-part tutorial on establishing restorative justice in schools, so that's something you can find there. In the Oakland, California School District, here's what they've done. They use an entire classroom full of circles to discuss problems within the classroom and the goals of the setting. Number 2, they use specific circles, smaller circles, for specific instances of conflict or misconduct. They also have a reintegration circle for students following suspension to kind of get them back into the loop and reaccepted. Ypsilanti High School has a conflict center of peer mediation where they take conflict, deal with it now, knowing that if they don't, it'll widen and escalate. So it's almost a preventive kind of thing. Then a restorative circle is used after a fight has taken place. Glenview Elementary School, face-to-face circles, dealing both with conflict and with academic issues. I'm not sure what that would look like, who that's familiar with, to have a face-to-face with a teacher in the room over academic issues, but I'm one of these people that believes in confrontation. Get it out in the open, find out what's going on, eliminate some of the passive-aggressive behavior, hopefully. 21 Oakland schools, Chicago schools, Denver schools, all are practicing some form of restorative justice, again with an emphasis on diffusion emotions early and building community. Meaningful reparations created out of a talking circle. I guess Kay Pranis and some others have said what circles do is they see conflict as an opportunity for community building, not just a way to deal punitively with something, but change the culture itself. A Salt Lake legislator has introduced legislation to change the focus in schools from managing behavior to building relationships, in kind of a core value of restorative justice. There's a statute in Illinois implementing restorative justice. One focus is to change the culture for grant sources. And of course, there are some criticisms that it's too lenient of attitude and too labor intensive. There's a new book out, Restorative Justice in U.S. Schools, a research review. There is the Little Book of Restorative Discipline for Schools, another book entitled Better Carrots Than Sticks. All of this can be found on Amazon. Probably the newest book, Creating Restorative Schools by Martha Brown, and that's about the Oakland district with particular focus on racial ethnic issues. Fanaya Davis, again, 8 tips for restorative schools. Number 1, assess need. Number 2, engage the school community. Number 3, hire a restorative justice coordinator, which my colleague is. Number 4, begin training. Number 5, school-wide implementation practice in all casual settings. In other words, begin to model that in informal areas, in conversation in the cafeteria, on the schoolyard, whatever. Number 6, institute restorative discipline. Number 7, involve students in peer restorative practices. Nothing is perfect. Evaluate as you go along. Evaluate and react to places we seem to need change. Again, my colleague who's about to come up here is more of a practitioner. I'm more of a theoretician, but I will share one experience. Our ministry once had a charter school called John Wesley Charter School, and we targeted youngsters that were under suspension. And we tried to implement a restorative school setting. The paradigm we used began with a sort of goal setting and value setting on paper. Around here, we value this. Around here, we don't do that. What we discovered was with an existing faculty, we couldn't get a buy-in. In other words, for that to work for us, we probably had to have a complete new faculty whose employment contracts included an adherence to these kinds of principles, this way of doing business, and a concession of a certain amount of their teaching time to the restorative processes. So that was the unfortunate experience that I learned from. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Miko Freeman. I'm a case manager and a restorative coordinator, all 2 positions at our school, Phoenix Rising Alternative Education Program. Mr. Bowser kind of set the stage perfectly because pretty much everything he talked about, we started implementing this year. We started out, with our administration, we put our restorative practices into a policy and procedure. After that, I started putting together, a lot of research that I've done through the books, through some of them which Mr. Bowser pointed out. But there's some resources out there that I want to share with Restorative Practices Whole School Implementation Guide. And that's actually a very good start for anybody who's wanting to get the A to Z implementation of it. One of the first topics I want to talk about are community circles. Before we even became a restorative school on an all school level, the community circles they provided. Well, let me back up first. I want to read you something. It's an explanation of the circle itself. The circle is a potent symbol. It's a shape. It implies community, connection, inclusion, fairness, equality, and wholeness. Now, that is a very, very powerful statement, because when you think about it, a lot of our students at our school, they haven't been included in a lot of anything. Everything that has happened to them maybe has been done to them instead of have been done with them. And that's maybe being in court involvement, or whatever the school has done as far as maybe just to behavior-wise, just suspensions, court involvement, DHS. These things, when we look at our youth and what things have troubled them or created trauma, is the things have been done to them by our community, by our society and communities that we live in. But this right here implies community, connection, inclusion, fairness, equality, and wholeness. So one of the reasons why I wanted to share this is because one year, like I said, before we even implemented this, we circled up. I was paired up with a teacher at the time, because our school, we have an advisor and we have a case manager or a social worker that was paired up with a teacher. And within this year, what we did, we circled up, and all we did is we just created a circle, and we used it for various things. Mainly was to start a new culture of inclusion, equality, and fairness, because in our circle, every young person has a voice there. Everything there, everything that we talk about it stays in our circle. So after a while, our kids start to feel safe again, they start to share things. They start to share a lot of things that, when we look at the behavior they display on a daily basis, a lot of times we just look at the symptom, but we don't really get to the underlying problem. And that's one of the things that community circles, they help us with, is get to the underlying problem. So then we can start the real work as far as how to address some of these issues they're going through, so they can progress, so they can finally say, okay, I want my education. I understand the importance of it. But I'm going to share a story about this, and one of the reasons why I share this is because this is a prime example of why circles are so important. We have so many in our community. We have a lot of our community members. They come with no support. So we have these young people who are pretty much raising themselves on just pretty much every level. And so when we have a young person with no support, the behavior becomes a little more challenging. And so with our community circles, as time goes by, we had a variety of different gang members who were, at this time, more girls than guys at the time, and so it was very interesting. But basically, outside the classroom, it was just drama. It was literally, we had to a lot of times walk with them to and from classes, and even inside the class, we had to stay in there, and it was because how heated it would get. But as time gone by, every morning, the teacher I was paired up with, one thing that we kind of practiced without really even understanding was just a more effective language using with our children. And so as time goes by, we were having these circles, and after a while, we didn't really get into no serious topics. We just use these circles to build connection, and just for our young people to feel safe and just be able to talk, because a lot of our students will not talk. They're shut down in a lot of areas of life. And so after a while, these girls that were fighting outside of class and just really had it bad, one of the girls from the opposite gang, the other gang, actually witnessed something very traumatic the night before in her life. And she came to school one morning, and you could tell she just was experiencing PTSD, like right there. And so we circled up, and we just decided that time we're going to use a circle just to encourage her. And so this other girl who were just sworn enemies, actually came in and just sat down, and she was one of the ones who encouraged this young lady to just keep her head up and keep pushing. And so from that moment on, it was like a different feeling between both of them, because after that, it just seemed like a lot of things just were okay in a way where they both could go on without their day, without having to worry about the safety of the school or each other, and just being able to focus on their education at that time. But the point of it is when we talk about our community circles and what it means, the connection is one of the biggest, is a very huge important thing, because a lot of our students that we deal with really don't have a connection to an education system. You know, that's one of the reasons, a lot of reasons why they come to our school. And fairness, equality, and inclusion, and that's one of the things that we put into practice. But another topic that I wanted to share with you was our restorative practice, our paradigm shift. This is one of the things that when we was talking about a whole school implementation, it's one of the challenges is the restorative paradigm shift. I'm just going to read you a little something from the IRP on paradigm shift that we're working on. It's what's fundamental about restorative justice practice is a shift away from thinking about laws being broken, who broke the law, and how we punish the people who broke the laws. There's a shift to, there was harm caused, or there's disagreement. You're doing great. Keep going. Or dispute. There's conflict. And how do we repair the harm, address the conflict, meet the needs so that relationships and community can be repaired and restored? It's a different orientation. It's a shift. That in itself is a different investment than what we're usually looking at. One of the things that we do is we have what we call a community referral, a restorative referral. And so, for instance, let's say, you know, a teacher, they're having an issue with a student in class, and a lot of times the teacher doesn't have the time to, you know, deal with it right then and there, because they're trying to teach a class, keep their class going. So what they do is they fill out a restorative request, and what that is it's using the evidence-based language that Mr. Bowser was talking about earlier when we were talking about what happened, who was impacted, what needs do those involved have, how do we repair the harm, and so when we get a referral, then we'll sit down and we'll talk about, you know, our next step as far as dealing with this. And so a lot of times, like with our process, we'll deal with some behavior on a little more like a level 0, which we put it, and those are one-on-ones, and that's part of what we're doing. Like with our teachers, we'll go to on a one-on-one is basically the student and the teacher. We'll have with the mediator, figuring out, you know, talking about what the behavior is, what the issue is in the class, you know, with the main goal of maybe having an agreement upon return to the class, because a lot of times when a student may, you know, show negative behavior, if they leave or be asked to leave, a lot of times they'll just either go get sent to ISS, or they'll just return with no type of reentry process. And so what our process is, you know, is more like a one-on-one, and that's with the teacher and the advisor, teacher and the student, and that the main goal of that is for them to come to agreement. And when they both come to agreement, then the student has more of a buy-in, because they're a part of the process. It's not a process that's being done to them, but it's a process that's being done with them. And that's the difference in maybe you know, a traditional approach versus a restorative approach. Another part of our process is we was talking about building community values in the classroom, rules versus values, traditional versus restorative. One of the things that our community circles provides is an option for a student and the teacher to come up with classroom values together. You know, for instance, for the beginning of the year, what does this year look like? What values do we want to set, you know, create our classroom with? For instance, you know, the teacher might, you know, start the first one, like, something that bothers me is I feel, you know, it makes me angry or upset when I'm trying to teach and somebody's on their cell phone. So I would like to put down the value of respect, technology, policy, or value. And so then we'll go around and we'll ask the students input, you know, how does that feel to you? You know, is that, you know, what is your view on that? How do you feel about that? Can you agree to this? And so once we go around the circle, create our values, you know, we'll put them up on a poster board or place them around the classroom. But that process, that circle process, is a do with. You know, it's an inclusion. It's equality. It's the student is a part of the process versus the process being done to them, and they have more of a buy-in. So if they do, you know, if they do break that value, you know, then they're more likely to come back and, you know, and honor the request, honor the value that they helped create. So that's another powerful way that we use circles as far as creating our classroom norms and versus rules. You know, violation of relationship versus violation of rules. It's a different buy-in. It's a different approach. Another thing that we do is a reentry, restorative reentry. For instance, when we do have school fights, I mean, and we have a process. It's called a restorative reentry process, and what that looks like is we have the students come in with, you know, whoever their support is. We have whoever's involved. We'll result back to the evidence-based questioning of what happened, who was impacted, and all who was impacted should be in that community circle. Everybody who had a piece in it, regardless if it's just a teacher who was nearby, because when things like that break out, it affects a lot of different people. A lot of people have different triggers we might know about, and it may trigger something from the past. So on many different levels, it's effective. It affects people, and so anybody who was around should, that was affected by the behavior, should be involved in this process. And so what that looks like is once, we'll have a restorative circle. And one of the challenges with that is because a lot of our students would rather just go sit in ISS or whatever room that you have. We now have a refocus room versus an ISS, and refocus room is basically what it sounds like, is a chance to refocus, and there'll always be, a case manager in there who is able to work with our student on, repairing the harm, or just trying to, support our culture, because a lot of times our students, it's hard for a student to sit down there and just answer questions or be a part of this when they're just used to maybe just being suspended or just pushed off to ISS or whatever, and it's done. That's it. There's no teaching, there's no growing. It's just, that's that. And so this process, the challenge is getting our kids to be able to respond, to how they feel, what they're feeling, but also making it right to the people that they affected, and sitting in front of the people that they affected. That is a very difficult thing to do whenever you've affected somebody through your behavior or choice you made, and then now you have to face them and actually come up, hear them. That's a powerful piece. And right now we've got students who actually are pretty familiar with circling up and having reentry process, who are reentry process because of harm they've done. But even though they cause harm through their behavior multiple times, they are learning more and more each time, because we are bringing them back. We are taking the time to teach them how to make it right. What is that like? Who all is affected? It is very, very. It takes a lot out of you, but the investment is I can't really explain the investment, because it is just so much. It's so awesome to see a young person who normally responds or reacts with violence or just such impulsive behavior that there's, it's hard to see them going somewhere positive. But after a while, after sitting in these restorative circles, reentry process, it's I'm going to give you an example of where I'm getting at. All right, so we had these two girls who got in a very, very bad fist fight. The other girl jumped in, so it was more like a 2-on-1 situation. And all three of these girls were like best friends at one time. Long story short, we did a reentry process for all. We circled up, but later down the road, after these girls after the girls sat together in a circle, face to face, everybody was able to part ways, but nobody was still really talking. A couple of days later, the girl that jumped in noticed this other girl that she beat up was avoiding her, like walking all the way around her, like as she was scared. And so she comes up to me and says, "Nico, we need to have a circle. We need to have this meeting now because I don't want her to think that I'm angry. She's like avoiding me, and I know she feels that way." So for this young girl to acknowledge how her behavior affected this young girl and it still continued to affect her, but yet call her own meeting, that is exactly what we are looking for when we talk about how to respond to your emotions or how you're feeling, whether it's angry or anger or whatever it is that you're going through. But restorative practice is it's an investment. It does take more, but we're investing in our young people, and this investment could change the direction of when they leave our schools. What will they do with their life? How are they going to react? How are they going to respond? If we teach them how to, then they will have a better chance of success in society, to get a job, to keep a job, to contribute to society, be a member of it, instead of just not having no connection to it. So that's kind of what I have for today. I know I missed a lot. There's so much more I want to share, but thank you very much.
All right, so in here in just a minute, if you have any questions, we'll be able to get those answered. But just real quickly, Joe Hendershot, who is a practitioner, an educational and a mental health practitioner for Hope for Wounded, has quoted that 47 million students are wounded. And he describes a wounded student as someone who has already experienced trauma. So to imagine that 47 million students, pre-K through 12th grade, have already encountered traumatic events, and how we then, as an educator, need to address so that we don't trigger stopping academic growth while we have to deal with behavior growth. And so I've been making notes as they have been speaking. A traditional approach really asks 3 questions. What happened, who's to blame, and what's the appropriate punishment? And as alt-ed settings, we always like to engage with our children a little differently. We don't like to come more assertive and aggressive. As a traditional, we always state that we kind of pick our battles with hats and different attire versus a traditional school, but then even behavior. And so in a restorative model, you're actually asking 4 questions. What happened? Who's been affected and how? How can we put right to the harm? And what have we all learned so that we're able to make different choices next time? Because our kids, when we kick them out, when we punish them, they don't always process. And then sometimes they even have the anger because they see that they only played a part that isn't an equitable part in the incident. And so having that conversation will be very impactful. Several resources that they did talk about that I want to just reiterate, if these are further things you want to look at. Miko mentioned the San Francisco Unified School District Restorative Practices Whole School Implementation Guide. And another one is from the state of Illinois, has an Implementing Restorative Justice Guide for Schools. And then Oakland Unified School District has a website that has several videos that even show the different circles in that communication and how we're teaching those kids to behave appropriately within those school districts. And then again, Miko is from Phoenix Rising, which is a partnership between the Tulsa Bureau and Tulsa Public Schools, if you guys are wanting a more local partner to kind of ask your questions if you've got them later. So as we're impacting discipline, attendance, and climate and culture, kind of be thinking about the process we take. As we all are aware of the 18 school shootings we've had since January 1 and other traumatic incidences that we know our kids bring to us every day. And then one more resource is the Restorative Justice in U.S. Schools, and it's a research review. It was produced in 2014. So do we have any questions at this point? I'm not seeing any questions, Gary. Are you? All right. So then this will be up on the website for you guys to utilize at a later date, or if you have questions. Oh. Okay. So one question says, resource titles available. So I will put those resources as well as the video link out on the listserv. That way I think it'll get to everybody. So if you're not on the listserv, then, or you can just email me and I'll send those to you. And then Cheryl, all your questions are coming in. So Phoenix Rising was the alt ed program in Tulsa Public Schools. And it's a partnership between the Tulsa Bureau and TPS. Tulsa County Juvenile Bureau and TPS. Okay, and then can we have Cheryl Tatum be able to talk to them about the state organization?
If you want to talk?
Yes.
Oh, let's see.
We're trying to figure it out, Cheryl. Hold on.
There she is. Okay, Cheryl, see if you can talk now.
Okay, I can talk. Are you guys able to hear
Yep,
me?
we hear you.
Perfect. Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that we are starting the Oklahoma Alt Ed Association, and we'd love to have everybody join because we can continue to share these resources, and we're hoping to do like a ed camp and maybe even do some regional meetings and just ways that we can continue to connect. And so the information is on the bottom of the Alt Ed website on the State Department, so I just put the link there. And on there is the simple form that you just click to join. It's free this year, but I'll also put the link to join right here in chat if you want to click on that. But we'd love to see everyone join the association.
Awesome. Okay. So any other questions? Any questions for our speakers? Okay, I'm just so excited that they were able to be here today because, as I told them earlier, I knew just enough to be dangerous about restorative justice approaches. And so, like I said, if you've got any questions, I can get you in touch with them, or we'll find the resources, and I'll get these resources as well as the webinar link out in the next day or so. And then if you want to join the organization, that link is also on our State Department Alt Ed page. Thanks so much.
That was the first time